Good Monday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. I hope you had a good weekend. Browns back to the business of football out in Berea. Andrew Berry, general manager, his end-of-the-year media gathering, talked about where the Browns are and what lies ahead in the next couple of weeks.
The next few weeks, it's really reflection and self-assessment. We look at everything that we did, A to Z, on the field, off the field, with the goal of improvement. And it's really not just improvement, but positioning the organization in a way where, we can have our first home playoff game in 29 years, where we can consistently, produce playoff teams and deep runs. And ultimately, the goal is to bring the franchise its first Super Bowl. So all the decisions moving forward will be with that goal in mind. And at times that way lead to, hard and uncomfortable, decisions. But everything will be with that mindset for improvement.
With that, let's welcome in Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram, as well as brownzone.com. Scott, you were out in Berea. That kind of encapsulates where the Browns are, and there are some tough decisions ahead.
Yeah, without a doubt. And, whether that's letting go of a veteran or trying to restructure a contract, or what we've already seen is moving on from coaches that have been there for 4 years. Whatever they think is best to have this team take that next step, right? That's what all the decisions are going to be about. That's what all the decisions have to be about. So that makes sense. We just don't know what those difficult decisions are, right? Is it Nick Chubb? Is it Amari Cooper? Is it Joe Flacco? Is it whoever it is? Those are going to crop up, and it's this whole view of, okay, we got a million decisions to make. How do we make the right combination to get this team to take the next step, or 2, 3, 4 more steps to get to that ultimate goal?
Yeah, and you know what? At least they're acknowledging, they made the playoffs, and it seems like they want to go forward. So I take that as a good thing. The immediate one that we kind of talked about, moving on from Alex Van Pelt, so they have an offensive coordinator opening to fill. That's obviously the next decision. Andrew Berry asked about that.
I understand that that's a topic of interest, the coaching staff in general. Quite honestly, we're not going to comment on that in detail until the 24 coaching staff is finalized, and then all those questions will be answered at the appropriate time.
What can you just, as a follow, and what are you looking for in the next offensive coordinator?
Again, Jeff, every coaching staff question we'll address that when the staff is filled. There's still too much in flux.
Even with the OC change, the plan is for Kevin to still call plays next season, correct?
Yeah, so it's a good question, Jake. I'd say number one, that's something that we always talk about every offseason, and kind of the self-assessment part. Part of that depends on where we land with staff and what Kevin's preferences are. Ultimately, that's going to be his decision as he constructs the staff. We've mentioned multiple times, I think that's one of Kevin's strengths. But how that operates from year to year, that's ultimately something that we reassess.
The OC change is not connected to that potential.
I think it's important or a good idea with your coaching vacancy to have someone associated with Watson who coached him before.
Okay, I'll answer one question, Tony, on the coaching staff. You got me. All right. I don't. We're going to look for the best people. We're just going to look for the best people, and it's just as simple as that.
Scott, it was kind of interesting, so it isn't important for Deshaun Watson. They're trying to get somebody that brings in some new ideas. I don't think it had as much to do with Alex Van Pelt, them moving on from it, as they just realized they needed something to get the most out of their offense.
I think that's fair to say. Now, we don't know all the details, revolving around the Alex Van Pelt situation. I know they offered him a different position on staff. He turned it down. I think he's looking to go be a coordinator with play calling responsibility somewhere else. So I think this could benefit him as well. But, so much of this offseason, and it was the same with last season, so much of the offseason is going to be about putting Deshaun Watson in the best situation possible, whether that's adding more weapons on offense, protecting him better, finding more coaches who have experience doing what he does best. The shotgun, the RPO, the dual threat ability of Watson, right? The run game is such a big part of what he does. I think that only makes sense to try to maximize his talents in every way possible. And I think the coaching staff is one of those ways. Now, I think Andrew Berry's right. The next coordinator doesn't need to have worked with Watson in the past, but he has to have experience with what Watson does.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, and that makes sense. That's why you go out and you try to get somebody. All right, we do know a couple of more names that have talked to or will talk to the Browns about that position. As you tweeted out, Ken Dorsey interviewed with the Browns as an offensive coordinator. Texans quarterback coach Jared Johnson scheduled to interview as well. And Scott, Jared Johnson's a guy that's kind of a young, up and coming. It'll be interesting to see because Bobby Slowick seems to be interviewing for every head coach. The offensive coordinator who Johnson worked under seems to be getting a number of looks as a potential head coach.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to gauge these things, but, you know, I would think right now that Bobby Slowick gets a head coaching job. So do the Texans just promote, Jared Johnson to their coordinator role? I certainly think that's one way D'Amico Ryans could go if it goes down that path. But he's an interesting guy. He played quarterback at Texas A&M, bounced around the league, didn't play but was on a bunch of teams, played in the Canadian Football League, started coaching in high school, and has really made a quick ascension up the coaching ranks. This is his first year as a quarterbacks coach. Last year in 2022, he was assistant quarterback coach with the Vikings. But for you only to be in that role 1 year and then start to get coordinator interviews, first of all, it speaks to how well C.J. Stroud played this year under him. But secondly, it speaks to how impressive Johnson must be, that teams look at him and go, hey, this guy is on the rise. Maybe you take a chance on him early because you really think he's going to grow into somebody who has a bright future.
Yeah, and that's usually the way it works with the younger guys that ascend into the coordinator position and also head coaching positions. All right, so we mentioned Ken Dorsey. That was a guy that was Josh Allen's OC, was fired in the middle of the year. Take a look at this. The difference between Josh Allen's rookie and sophomore seasons, 2018-19. So Ken Dorsey was the QB coach in 2019. Allen 6% higher completion percentage, 1.8 lower interception percentage, had 21 passing yards per game higher, 18 passer ratings higher, and 1.8 higher TD percentage. So Ken Dorsey, which isn't necessarily a sexy name, does have some success with Josh Allen's much more physical, but he's a dual threat guy, and he had a lot of success when Dorsey took over.
Yeah, and we saw Allen run the ball a bunch last night, right? And that loss to Kansas City. So that's certainly a part of his game. I think Dorsey's an interesting candidate. Number one, I think the first thing people will focus on is he got fired during this season, right? And then the Bills went on a run late without him. And I get that. That's the most recent thing on his resume. But you put up those stats, which are impressive stats. I know he's a smart guy. Been around him. He was, Brown's backup quarterback for a couple of years. I know he's a smart guy. Brian Daboll was a coordinator that he replaced with the Bills when Daboll got the Giants head coaching job. Daboll brought him to Buffalo. They knew each other. And, I'm a big fan of Brian Daboll. I think he does a great job. I think he did a great job with Josh Allen. So I think there's a lot of things to like about Dorsey. Now, if he came here, I think Stefanski would keep calling the plays. Dorsey's only been doing it for, a year and a half. So there's no need to give that responsibility to Dorsey. But, like I said, he's a young guy. He's played the position. He's coached a guy who can run it. He's coached one of the best quarterbacks in the league in Allen. I don't think Allen said anything negative about Dorsey. I think he liked working with him, despite how it ended with just, the Bills weren't playing well. They were turning it over a bunch. So, yeah, I think he's an intriguing guy. I think I don't know how that hire would go over, but I think there is a lot to like there.
All right. So this is another thing that in an inadvertent way ties back to the Browns. Titans, Panthers, and Falcons all plan to bring in Brian Callahan for second interviews this week. That's per sources. Brian Callahan is the son of Bill Callahan, Browns offensive line coach. Andrew Berry was asked if he thought the Browns could retain Bill Callahan.
I definitely understand the interest there. We obviously value Bill very highly. He's done a great job with us the past 4 seasons. But I probably don't feel comfortable commenting on that until we address the coaching staff.
Scott, if Bill Callahan wanted to go and be a part of his son's staff, I don't imagine that's something the Browns would try to stop.
I tell you what, I think that'd be a very interesting situation. And I tend to agree with you that they wouldn't, right? You don't want to create a hostile work environment and the guy's going to be griping because he wants to go work with his son. Having said that, I mean, the Browns have done nothing but rave about Bill Callahan since he arrived. They think he's a huge part of the offensive line success, huge part of the pass protection, huge part of the run game, right? Like he's in the weeds designing the run blocking schemes and how they're going to do that, the run game in its entirety. They would not want to see him go. They gave him an extension last year because teams started to kind of sniff around and maybe hire him as a coordinator, and they gave him an extension, kept him as their O-line coach. And, I don't think Brian would hire Bill as his offensive coordinator. I don't think, that seems like Bill's moved on from that kind of role. It's more about offensive line coach. I could be wrong about that, but that's how it seems to me. And if you don't do that, if you don't hire him to be coordinator, the Browns wouldn't have to let him go. So I think there's going to be a decision to be made. I think the Browns are probably rooting against Brian getting a head coaching job so they don't have to have this discussion. But, yeah, I could see a scenario where he leaves, and that would be a big loss, which is why I think the Browns would think about at least fighting it. They might not, but they would think about it.
Yeah, again, I think the only way they let him go is if it's to coach on his son's staff. Let me make that clear. I think that might be the only thing that they ultimately say, okay. All right, before we go to break, Myles Garrett named to the All-NFL team by the Pro Football Writers of America, 4th straight year that he has done that. That's the longest current streak among active players. Joel Bitonio was named to the All-AFC, so the All-American Conference team. And again, that's not a surprise. Myles, it'll be interesting to see if he does in fact win that Defensive Player of the Year. There's a decent chance that happens. He gets his first.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's still the favorite for that award. I don't think it's a slam dunk like it might have been in week 16 or 17. TJ Watt had the big finale against Baltimore, got up to, I think it was 19 sacks he finished with. But I would still put Myles as a slight favorite. We'll find out at the honors, the awards show before the Super Bowl. But this just follows all the other awards, right? Myles was an All-Pro, Pro Bowler, the All-NFL PA team, and then Joel Bitonio, Pro Bowler, and then it was a notch below in the Pro Bowl voting. He didn't get the first team like he had the last couple of years. But Joel was banged up this year. But, yeah, Myles had a great year, deserves all these accolades, and I think he deserves Defensive Player of the Year. I know that there's arguments against it. I know people in Pittsburgh disagree wholeheartedly, but I think he deserves Defensive Player of the Year.
Scott Petrick, a Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle Telegram, as well as BrownZone.com, and I can step aside, take a quick time out. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason when we return. Stay with us.
You might have expected all the games and all the excitement. And even though you couldn't see it right away, it's all right here. 5 games in 1. $22 million in prizes between $25 and $500, and a shot at $1 million grand prize. Golden Casino. A night's worth of excitement for just $10.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE with Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle Telegram, as well as BrownZone.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
I was reading or seeing that they're maybe looking at Ken Dorsey, and my question for that is why? Wasn't he fired midway through the season because his offense was so stagnant? So why would you bring that person in as an offensive coordinator? Why don't you go to somebody who's having an up-and-coming career, not somebody who was either fired or they took the play calling duties from him because he was so stagnant? And another thing is, we should bring Kareem Hunt back and move on from Jerome Ford. He had, 2 or 3 big runs, but yet it looked like he tiptoed through the line and was scared to get hit. I think Kareem Hunt's a much better back. Just my opinion. Go Browns. Woo-hoo.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Scott, we kind of showed a little bit earlier what Ken Dorsey had done. Everything's kind of situation dependent. Relative to Kareem Hunt, I think he's just he's not nearly as explosive as he was. Really good guy, short yardage, but he made it sound like he's kind of looking around, and we'll see. I'd be surprised if he comes back.
Yeah, the Dorsey thing, just real quick. Coaches get fired, right? It happens. Brian Daboll bounced around, right? Like, that happens. I get it. I get that that's the most recent thing with him, and if you want to start fresh, that's fine. But he's a young guy. He's a young coach. I think he's got a bright future. So I don't know if I would let that determine whether or not I hired him. And as far as the running backs, the Browns like Jerome Ford a lot. I don't know if they think he's a number one back, right? And that's a question because we don't know, when Nick Chubb comes back, what Nick Chubb will be like. I think they need to add to that room. But they think he's got a big upside. They think he can go the distance. They think he's a strong running back. Now, I get the caller's point. Like, there were times where I felt he was too hesitant. And there was a lot of those kind of wide runs where he just kept going sideline, instead of putting a foot in the ground and getting upfield. And instead of it being a no gain or a 1 yard gain, it'd be a 5 yard loss. And there were too many of those. I thought he was better against the Jets. I thought he really ran hard against the Jets, as hard as I remember seeing him run. But I think, he's still young, second year. He only had 8 carries as a rookie. So I think it's premature to give up on Jerome Ford. And the things you don't like about Jerome Ford, Kareem Hunt has, right? He runs really hard. He usually finds a crease. He just doesn't have the burst that he used to, like you said, Dave. So, I have no doubt Jerome Ford will be here. I would doubt that Kareem Hunt is, just because he's looking, and, I don't know if the Browns feel like he's a fit when they reconstruct this running back room.
All right. Along those lines, one of the tough decisions that we talked about earlier that the Browns have to make is relative to Nick Chubb. Final year of his contract, $15.8 million. None of it's guaranteed, but it sounds like Andrew Berry and the Browns are looking for a way to keep him in a Browns uniform.
I probably came into this year, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of respect for Nick Chubb, it was a 10. And probably coming out of this year, it's now a 20. Nick, you would have never guessed that Nick was out for the season with how he operated within the building. I mean, it was like he was doing 2-a-day practices for rehab, and the tenacity at which he has attacked his rehab, and which, he did everything in his power this year to heal himself, but also make a positive impact with the team. It culminated, you guys know, he's not like a super talkative person, but for him to do the whole Batman thing, in front of the Jets game, it's like he wanted to do everything in his power to help the team win. So, I would, in terms of Nick moving forward, obviously I understand that's a little bit the elephant in the room. Nick, I can say for myself, no one in the organization, I understand our family. Nobody wants to see, that carry in Pittsburgh, be the last time he carries the ball for the Cleveland Browns. And, obviously there are things that we'll have to work through, but, that would not be our intention as well. We obviously will work to keep him on the team.
And again, that's not a surprise. The question is, can they find the right number?
Yeah, it's not a surprise, but there are reasons to question whether or not the Browns, not that they'd want him back. We know how valuable Nick Chubb's been, but, right, you don't know how he's going to be coming off the dual knee surgeries. He's going to miss part of the season at least. And he's got a big number, right? You mentioned the cap number. Now it's a $4 million hit, like a dead cap number if you don't pay him. There's no way they're going to pay him that much money for a partial season coming off the injuries, but I don't think Nick would expect to get that money, right? So I think there's enough common ground where they'll be able to work something out. Now, whether that's, restructured short-term deal, whether it's restructured long-term deal, whether there's a ton of incentives, like that's where, the devil's going to be in the details for that. But he is so valuable that, the Browns don't believe in paying a running back that much money, period. But he's an exception, right? Like they didn't believe in extending a running back, but they did with Chubb. So I think this is just another one of those areas where they're willing to make an exception because he's such a special person to them and a special teammate.
So we've already said, much like last year, the thing this year is how do they maximize Deshaun Watson? What areas of the offense do you think need to be upgraded for them to do that?
Yeah, I think you start with receiver, right? We've talked about it a million times, Dave. And we could argue that they were receiver short all year long. And, I think an argument could be made on both sides, right? When Joe Flacco was in the game, they threw for a bunch of yards with the guys they had. And he spread the ball to 7, 8, 9 guys a game. So that's less of an indictment on the receiving core and more on, well, why didn't the other quarterbacks take advantage of that? And why weren't the other quarterbacks able to have the same success? But if you just go guy by guy, Amari Cooper's great, and then Elijah Moore probably isn't a number 2. I think Amari Cooper was still a legit number 1 this year. Pro Bowl starter, 1,200 yards. But Elijah Moore wasn't a number 2. Don Peoples-Jones and Cedric Tillman weren't really number 3s, right? Marquise Goodwin got hurt and just didn't have any kind of impact. So there's weaknesses on that receiving core, so that would be the first spot. Could you bump up the tight end group? Probably. David Njoku was great, but Harrison Bryant's a free agent, probably won't be here. Jordan Akins, I think it was a 1-year deal, probably won't be here. Can you get a more explosive number 2 tight end? Yeah, and that's part of the surrounding Watson and the receiving core. And then, the run game was great early. Then you lose Nick Chubb, and it wasn't the same. Part of that was the offensive line. So it's making sure your offensive line's healthy and adding to that stable of running backs.
So I know you also have written an article about this, about the culture. Players, coaches seem to think they've got a strong foundation for sustained success. Wow, I talk for a living. Take us through that article and what you found.
Yeah, it was one of those kind of takeaways from when you're talking to all those guys on the locker cleanout day. And they just feel like what was built this year, and we've talked about it a million times, starts at the Greenbrier, and everybody, the forced bonding. But that carried over, and there was better chemistry. And then it continued to grow throughout the year. Then they take the week in L.A., and Anthony Walker Jr. said that was huge. Yeah, we lost at Denver, we lost at L.A., but we came back a closer team and a better team, and it showed up. It showed up on the field, right? Because then they go on a 4-game win streak to clinch a playoff spot. So it's all these things that contributed to better chemistry, better camaraderie, better communication on the field, right? Which people talk, well, how did show up on the field? The communication was better. Guys supporting each other was higher this year. But then you're going to have so much turnover, right? It's going to be 20 new guys or whatever that number is. And they feel like what was built this season will continue because the core guys know what it takes to have this type of culture. And that's guys like Myles Garrett, Joe Bitonio, and Nick Chubb, right? And it could go down the list. J.O.K. and Joe, Wyatt Teller, just, all the core guys that we assume are going to be here for the next few years. Dalvin Tomlinson, Grant Delpit. So you have those guys, the core, plus they saw the difference between 2022 when the locker room wasn't great and the chemistry wasn't what it needed to be till now, and they will try to continue those things, right? The core tenants, they know what they are, and they're going to make sure everyone else that comes in, right, all the new guys, they follow the blueprint from 2023.
Scott Petrek from the Elyria Chronicle, Telegram, BrownZone.com, and I are going to step aside, take another quick time out. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, talk a little bit about where the Browns are salary cap-wise next year. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrak from the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram, as well as BrownZone.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, Dave. This is Tim from Cleveland. I hope you're doing well. Always enjoy the show. Just had a thought. I've heard some rumblings over the past couple of years that cities like Cleveland will never win the Super Bowl because our market is too small, despite having fans around the world. I was just kind of curious what you think about that. Have a great day and go Browns.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Scott, football, more so than any other sport, small market. I mean, Green Bay is the smallest market probably of any professional sports team, and they've gone and won. It really doesn't matter. What matters is the front office and getting the right people, and knock on wood, it looks like the Browns have figured out that piece of it finally.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, you look at Cincinnati was in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, right? Buffalo could easily have been there over the last 5 years. Kansas City's not a huge market. We know how the success they've had. So, yeah, the NFL is the one where it matters the least. Now, there's extra money to be had in big markets, and it's not the TV, right? Why it's level playing field is because the TV contracts are all split evenly, and that's where most of the revenue comes from. But, Jerry Jones has an advantage because he's got the stadium and, he can make money that way. But for the most part, it's pretty even. And we've seen the Haslam's willing to spend money. So that's not it. Like, there's a huge difference between how the Dolans need to operate and how the Haslams can operate.
Yeah. And along those lines, the Browns owners are spending more real dollars than any other team by a significant margin. Now, the reason they're doing that is because the way the front office structures things. So the Browns are about $17.5 million over the projected salary cap for next season. Andrew Berry today was asked if the salary cap will hamper in any way the Browns making moves to improve the roster.
As we look at the contract management space, it's not something that we think about just at the time or 1 year at a time, Scott. It's something that you really do spend multiple years planning for. That's an area that we're very confident in, and we view it as a strategic advantage for us, and we'll continue to operate in a way that allows us to maximize the team.
And Scott, you asked that question. In short, they structure contracts so they can move it within the constraints of the salary cap.
Yeah, and they're smart enough that they can restructure when they need to. And I think they'd be in that group. The whole is the salary cap real discussion. I think they'd be in the no. It's not real. And we can always find more money. Now, eventually it's going to catch up with them. At some point, probably, right? Like we saw with the Rams. Eventually it caught up to the Rams. But that only got them for a year, and then they were able to come back and win the next year. So I kind of think the Browns feel like they can operate that way. And if they need $10 million to go sign a defensive end opposite Myles Garrett, they can figure out a way to do it, whether it's restructuring Deshaun Watson or figuring out another contract. And one example, and I'm no salary cap expert, but one example is Amari Cooper's due $20 million in 2024. If they sign him to an extension, they could lower that cap number from 20 million to like $1 million, right? And just bump it all down the road, and you add years and you give him new money, but it gives you salary cap relief in 2024. And there's multiple guys on the roster that they could do that with.
Yeah, and the thing is, the salary cap continues to go up because it's a percentage of the revenues. As long as that money-making machine known as the NFL keeps getting billions of dollars in television revenue, the cap will keep going up. All right, this is from the Bleacher Report. top players the Browns should target in free agency. They go linebacker Drew Tranquill of the Chiefs. Tranquill with half sack away from matching career best totals. 78 tackles. Browns could use an extra defender who can get after the opposing quarterback, reliable tackler. Devin White, Nicholas Morrow fall into that category as well. They also go with wide receiver Josh Reynolds. Cleveland needs clear-cut number 2 wide receiver to develop behind Amari Cooper. Reynolds proved to be a nice complementary option to Amon-Ra St. Brown with Detroit. May not want to leave that spot. He's been with Jared Goff for a number of years. Would be the perfect across-the-middle option to complement Cooper on the outside. Scott, I don't know if either of those make sense to me. I don't think they're going to. I don't think they're going to sign a linebacker, and I don't know that. I mean, no offense to Josh Reynolds, they need a bigger upgrade than that at number 2.
Yeah, it's interesting, Dave. I was thinking the same thing. Now, I was not super familiar with Reynolds. I went and looked him up. Big guy, so I like that about him, but hasn't had huge success. He feels like, from a number standpoint, a bigger Elijah Moore. I think you do want more than that, especially with Amari closing in on 30. Like maybe a succession plan at receiver, and he would not be it. And then of all the positions on this team, linebacker might be the one I would target the least. I think they probably need to re-sign either Sione Takitaki or Anthony Walker Jr. to go with JOK. But I don't think there's any way they make any kind of big investment there. And if you're looking to supplement the pass rush, it's not at linebacker. JOK does that fine. You would do it up front.
I agree wholeheartedly. Along those lines, you wrote an article about JOK, and I don't think anyone would argue he took the next step, especially later in the season. Take us through what you found with JOK and where you think he's headed.
Yeah, what the thing that stood out to me the most about that, well, first of all, Anthony Walker Jr. said after the playoff loss to the Texans, he texted JOK and said, next year, if you're not the best linebacker in the league, it's on you because you have enough talent to do that. And I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it, which is a pretty high compliment, right? The best linebacker in the league. But JOK put himself in that discussion with how well he played this year. And to me, he was the most improved player on the roster. And the other part of it was, and JOK mentioned it, Walker mentioned it, and so did linebackers coach Jason Tarver, that JOK would have bad plays that would linger and affect his performance the next play and even the rest of the game. And I remember doing a story on him. It was the San Francisco game. The Browns, had the upset of the 49ers. JOK had a bunch of plays, bunch of big splash plays. So I wrote a big story about him. The next week, he gets benched during the Colts game. Like, I'm watching, and Tony Fields, the second's playing. I'm like, where? And, he's like in and out of the lineup. I think he played his fewest snaps of the season. And it's because he struggled early and couldn't get past it. And as the season went on, he got much better at that. He'd have a bad play, put it behind him. And we saw him really stack performances at the end of that season. And you can even look at that Texans game, right? He gave up that long touchdown. He got sucked in, lets the tight end escape. Now, he didn't miss a tackle, but it was his guy. But after that, he had tackles for loss. He got to C.J. Stroud on a couple of plays, right? So I think if he figures that out, which it looks like he has, his instincts have always been good. He's crazy athletic. The arrow's definitely pointing up.
Scott, Patrick, and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, talk a little bit about the quarterback position for the Browns. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers,
and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free.
We continue talking Browns with Scott Patrick from the Elyria Chronicle Telegram as well as brownzone.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Flacco has a better arm and a bigger arm and a stronger arm. This is the reason why you should keep Flacco and start him and trade Watson. Watson is not going to do our team any good, in my opinion. They're trying to center themselves around Watson. I think that's just a disaster. Trade Watson to Dallas. As well as Chicago. Michael Gallup, you take their number 24 pick, ask for a 4th-round pick in this year's draft, and a 5th-round pick in 25. The Browns could pick the Nixon boy from Oregon and either the quarterback from Washington who may be there at number 24 if they was able to pull off this trade. And Flacco can train Thompson and the rookie quarterback. We can do this. All right, thank you. Bye.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails, Scott. They can't trade Deshaun Watson. They don't want to trade Deshaun Watson. And I wouldn't base anything on Joe Flacco. He's going to be 39. He's 39.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I mean, I don't think the guy's wrong that Flacco throws it better than Watson.
Nope.
That's not night and day.
That doesn't mean he's a better quarterback, though.
Right. But the bottom line is they can't trade him. Right? I don't think they want to. I think they believe in Watson, right? And obviously, publicly, there's no doubt about it. They're, Kevin Stefanski a week ago, Andrew Bayer today, fully confident in him. Andrew Bayer today said we expect him to have a really big year. But even if they had soured on him, there's nothing they could do about it. So you have to figure out a way to make it work. And none of those trades is feasible. It's not going to happen. No team's taking that contract. No team is trading for him. So then it becomes, how do you get the most out of Deshaun Watson, which we talked about. And I think there is reason to be optimistic that Watson can, if not become the same player he was in 2020, get close. There were glimpses this year, obviously not sustained. And he was out of the lineup too much. And whether that's his fault or not, to shoulder injuries, players get hurt. The second half against Baltimore is really what the Browns point to, and all you have to look at to say, hey, this guy can still play. He can still make plays in crunch time and lead a comeback. You just hope there's more of that.
So Andrew Berry was kind of asked about evaluating Watson in the Browns offense as well as where Deshaun Watson is at in the rehabilitation process.
Deshaun's progressing well. He's doing everything in his power in terms of rehab. He's coming along well. We anticipate him being on a normal or potentially ahead of schedule time. I hesitate to say that because it still is early, but we're really pleased with his progress so far and certainly looking forward to getting him back when he comes in the spring.
Deshaun, it seemed like every time he was turning a corner, the rotator cuff, and then Baltimore game and the broken shoulder. Do you feel comfortable with where how much you've been able to evaluate of him in game settings, kind of going forward?
Yeah, we'd all love to have him on the field more often. I think that's safe to say, himself included. Do feel really good about him. Happy with the progress that he's made within our organization, both on the field and off the field. And we're looking forward to getting him back next year. We think he's going to have a really big year and have a ton of confidence in him as our starting quarterback.
And Scott, there again, I think it's 770 snaps he's played in 2 years, which probably surprised you it was that many. But they didn't do it for a year or two. They're planning. The plan hasn't changed. They think he's the quarterback for the next 10 years, if you will.
Yeah, and Andrew Berry reaffirmed that today, right? He was asked to grade the trade. He said, hey, we looked at this as a 10-year thing. Quarterbacks played for a long time. And there's some truth to that. Like, that's how they view it. They didn't view it as a two-year example, a 2-year trial, right? They envisioned it more as a long-term thing. Having said that, the reality is, you're 2 years and you've gotten like 11 games in almost a quarter. And that's not enough. And, the suspension was a reason for the first year, and the shoulder was a reason for this year. He's getting older. It's been, 4 years since he was, played at his highest level with the Texans. So there's plenty of reasons to doubt that he'll ever get back to where he was. Now, the Browns can't view it like that. They have to view it like, hey, if this guy stays on the field, we're doing everything we can. We still think he's super talented. Talked about how hardworking he is. He's adaptable to things. All the things you're looking for in your quarterback as you try to find the right offense for him, find the right fit. So, yeah, I don't think they're, I don't think they look at it as a disaster like some people on the outside are. But there will come a time where that shifts, right? Like if year 3 next year, he's not any good or not good enough, right? Or can't stay on the field, then you have to start coming up with the next plan. But I think it's too early for them to give up, and I think it makes sense that it's too early to say this has been a failed experiment.
Yeah, and add another elite quarterback to the AFC pool with C.J. Stroud now coming there, and you can be sure, I'm guessing the Steelers are going to be adding something to that quarterback room, so we'll see how that goes too. All right, the Associated Press has been honoring NFL Coach of the Year since 1957. Kevin Stefanski can become just the 13th coach in NFL history to win that award multiple times this year. Shula, Hallis, Belichick, Gibbs, Ditka are on the list. That's pretty impressive company, and he's only been coaching 4 years, Scott.
Yeah, there's some good ones on there, right? Some Super Bowl winners, some Hall of Famers. Yeah, the award isn't the end-all be-all. And, Kevin Stefanski has one playoff win, and he wasn't even on the sideline for it. So, there's a difference between him and these other guys. But that does not take away the job that he did in his first year, right? Turning, this franchise around, really. Hadn't been to the playoffs in 18 years, and he gets them there in really tough circumstances. And then what he did this year in really difficult circumstances, and winning games with 4 quarterbacks and starting 5 quarterbacks, losing your running back, arguably your best player in week 2. And that doesn't even talk about what he does as a play caller. And, I know we talked about that a little bit earlier, but I think he's done a really good job as a play caller. So I think his trajectory certainly points up. I think he's going to get that extension. I think the Browns and their fans should feel good about Stefanski as their coach moving forward. And the coaches of the year are just kind of proof of that.
Yeah, and again, I'm not saying he's in that elite level, but again, a young guy, let him go, and he's figured some things out. You can see growth and development. I guess that's the bottom line. And if you're in a class with 2 Coach of the Years, that shows you're in the right. He's headed in the right direction.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And I thought it was interesting today when, Andrew Berry's talked about him plenty of times and he usually speaks glowingly of Stefanski. But today he said, I think he's got a really high ceiling. Like, he's still got room to get to that ceiling. And that makes sense because Kevin's still pretty young. But for him to phrase it like that, I thought was interesting because it is a guy that feels really mature, right? Has been here 4 years, is probably going to have 2 Coach of the Year awards. But yet, Andrew Berry's like, hey, there's a lot of room for him to grow still. And again, I think that's a positive for the organization and the fan base.
Scott Petrak, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Scott.
Thanks, Dave.
Scott Petrak, make sure you check him out. Brownzone.com on the internet. He is also the Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram. We're step aside, take a quick time out. Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dogs podcast and Network 216 straight ahead. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
You might have expected all the games, and all the excitement, And even though you couldn't see it right away, it's all right here. 5 games in one. $22 million in prizes between $25 and $500, and a shot at $1 million grand prize. Golden Casino, a night's worth of excitement for just $10.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams, I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns with Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dogs Podcast Network 216. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
This is where the Browns, if you want to take a blame, it squarely falls on Kevin Stefanski and Jim Schwartz. A colossal failure as far as that Houston game. Moving forward, you let a few coaches go. I didn't think it was right, but they did. You got to move forward with better choices, but Kevin is to blame. They was not prepared. Myles Garrett was right. They was not prepared defensively, and they was not prepared offensively altogether. Thank you.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Let's welcome in Tyler Johnson, Faithful Dogs Podcast Network 216. Tyler, blame, were they prepared? Obviously not. They also didn't execute. I mean, keep in mind, it was a 3-point game for a while. It was a 10-point game when they threw a pick six. I'm pretty sure they don't get coached to throw pick sixes. At some point in time, it comes down to the players. Now, I'm not absolving Jim Schwartz or Kevin Stefanski. They could have changed some things up. But when you get beat like that, it isn't just coaching.
Exactly, Dave. And it's funny because I've had this conversation with people as well. Kevin Stefanski does not have a play on his play sheet that says throw a pick six here to linebacker Christian Harris. That's just not how it works, you know, and players do have to execute. Joe Flacco was fantastic during this run for the Browns. There's no doubt. It was a great story. It was a lot of fun for all of us. But what happened at the end of the day, Joe Flacco was Joe Flacco. Throughout his NFL career, he has struggled with interceptions. He did in his brief time with the Browns. And, you know, the Browns are playing with house money as it is. I mean, you had so many guys that were still out injured in this game. And the fact that this team made the playoffs, to me, it's still incredible. And I know we're all disappointed that we lost in the first round because I still am. But at the same time, once you take a step back and you look at everything this team accomplished, getting to the playoffs with using 5 different quarterbacks, because Jeff Driscoll does count, even though he only started one game, 5 different quarterbacks, you won a game with 4 different quarterbacks. It's remarkable what they did this season. Of course, there are things they could have done better in that Houston Texans game, and they're going to make changes on the staff, as they should. Because after 4 years, I think it's time to get some new voices in there. I think Kevin Stefanski's making a right decision, and we're going to see who they pick moving forward. But you know what? I think we all need to just enjoy the fact that this team made the playoffs, given everything that they dealt with this past year.
Yeah, and again, it didn't end the way you wanted it. The tackles finally looked like the 4th and 5th tackles. The defense, the defense did not adapt, and that was a little bit. That was the most disappointing thing out of that whole game. All right, the Browns are moving towards hiring Tommy Rees as their tight ends coach. So he was the offensive coordinator for the Crimson Tide. Young guy, 31 years old. Mary Kay Cabot tweeting that out is Zach Jackson also reporting that initially. So Rees, a young guy, and that's an interesting one. An OC, former quarterback, tight ends coach, young offensive mind. again, you kind of, that's what you want. New ideas. Let's see what they get for running back coach. Let's see what they get for offensive coordinator. Trying to maximize a running quarterback. Tommy Rees had that this year at Alabama, too.
Yeah, I like the idea of hiring a guy like Tommy Rees. He's very young, like you mentioned. He's already been a coach for a number of years, ever since his playing career ended at Notre Dame. He was Notre Dame's offensive coordinator. Then he goes to Alabama to be their offensive coordinator. So he's been under Nick Saban already. I mean, he's coached under one of the greatest coaches of all time. And now he's coming to the Browns in a role that I think is very suitable because he's got experience at that college level. But what he's going to bring, and this is something you're going to see with a lot of Stefanski hires this offseason, he's going to bring a perspective from what the Browns want to get to on the offensive side of the ball. It's nothing against Van Pelt. It's nothing against some of these other coaches. But if your offense isn't constantly evolving, it is a little bit of a problem. And with Deshaun Watson, of course, being your quarterback, they want to get to mainly a shotgun-based offense. And Tommy Rees is going to bring a lot of ideas. And like you said, he's a young guy. And that's where a lot of coaching is trending these days. It's these young, hot coordinator types. You're bringing a guy who is a former offensive coordinator, and he's going to I'm sure he's going to be involved in the weekly game plan. I think it's a great hire, and I think one that's kind of under the radar that I don't think any of us really saw coming. So I like that hire a lot.
Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dog Podcast Network 216 and I can step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll hear from Andrew Berry. Take a look at some big decisions on the horizon for the Browns. Sports for CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
You might have expected all the games and all the excitement. And even though you couldn't see it right away, it's all right here. 5 games in one. $22 million in prizes between $25 and $500, and a shot at $1 million grand prize. Golden Casino, a night's worth of excitement for just $10.
We continue talking Browns with Tyler Johnson from the Faithful Dogs Podcast and Network 216. Andrew Berry talked about his philosophy on roster building today.
I think one of the things that you realize is, the NFL, the only constant is change. I think, when I met with you guys after 2020, I mentioned that even for the top teams or teams that have a lot of their guys under contract, there's typically, like, on average, a third of your team turns over, and that's regardless of your record. And it could be more depending on the health of your roster. I mean, more like long-term health as opposed to physical health. So I think as a general manager, you really go into the offseason understanding that running it back really isn't an option. It's just not with the economic realities of our sport. So I'd say, one, acknowledging that reality going into it, and then trying to make the best decisions that you can to improve the club. It's really as simple as that.
Tyler, Andrew Berry has had a decent amount of success at finding the one-year guys. I mean, might be prisoner of the moment, but Shelby Harris, Maurice Hurst. A couple of years ago, they were pretty good. Clowney was productive for a couple of years on one-year deals. He has been good at finding veterans that can produce on one-year deals.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And you look at, the Browns are going to have a lot of free agents this offseason. There are guys you can potentially bring back on a one-year deal. Shelby Harris absolutely comes to mind. Maybe Maurice Hurst. I know he was a fan favorite, and great story coming back from all the injuries that he's dealt with to have the year that he did before he ended up injured again. But then you look at it, could you bring a guy like Zadarius Smith back on a one-year deal given his age? What are they going to do at running back? Because I think they're going to have to do something there too with Nick Chubb's status being uncertain as far as when he's going to be back from his injury. And there's going to be a lot of talent at the running back position. So there's a lot of value, I think, to be found in free agency this year. And another position to keep an eye on is wide receiver, because with the draft classes that we've seen the last couple of years, and the absolute incredible one we're going to see this year, some of these guys on the free agent market at wide receiver, that money's not going to be there for them because there's no reason for a team to give a guy $20, $25 million, maybe even 15, you might be able to get a guy in a 1 year, $8 million deal, things along those lines, because they're going to have to take less money in some cases just because the draft class coming up has so much talent, and a team go out and get a cheap wide receiver. It's going to be very productive for them for half the cost. So Andrew Berry is going to have a really good offseason. He's going to be able to find those guys on those 1 year contracts, and you're going to see a Browns team next year similar to this year. Moving forward with the way the Browns cap is structured, with all the contracts that they're going to have, the best way to address the roster is these 1 year deals. And Andrew Berry is one of the best in the business, and you know he's going to find a good amount of bargains this offseason.
All right, so this is from Sports Illustrated. 5 big decisions that will define the Browns offseason. Number 1, hiring an offensive coordinator. That's pretty obvious. They will do that. Number 2, decide on the offensive play caller. Could be the offensive coordinator, could very well still be Kevin Stefanski. 3, find receiver help. 4, Nick Chubb's contract. 1 year left will account for roughly $15.8 million against the cap. And 5, Jack Conklin's contract. 3 years left, set to count $12 million against the cap in 24, 19.5 in 25 and 26. So when we think about this, Tyler, let's start. Chubb, I would imagine, and we heard earlier in the show, it sounds like they would like him back. It sounds like they got to find a number that works.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing with Nick Chubb. I mean, you want Nick Chubb back. You really do. But at the same time, given his contract, they're going to need to negotiate something that's more favorable for the Browns, because we don't even know when Nick Chubb's expected to be back. I mean, we're hoping he's back by the start of the regular season. That's not a guarantee at this point. So you need to negotiate something better. And then what you need to do on top of that, Dave, is you need to bring in, more than likely, a guy as a free agent, because, I mean, Kareem Hunt, he was good as a goal line back. You could see just that he is not the same player. Go in free agency and get a running back that's not going to get the money he's looking for. Give him a 1 year deal for probably $3.5 to $4 million, similar type of what Zeke Elliott got. And I think you can roll right there, or if you draft a guy, but this draft class is not super strong at running back. I don't know if Jerome Ford is the guy you really want as your starter moving into next year. If he could be more of your change of pace guy, I think that's ideally what the Browns want. But that's at least how I would address it. I would bet on Nick Chubb coming back. But again, it has to be favorable, or else the Browns might have to make a really tough decision there that fans wouldn't like.
Conklin is another one. That's the contract looked like a bargain at the time, and now, DeJuan Jones, the whole tackle thing. You put Jedrick Wills in that bin as well. But Conklin's contract, it's going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with Jack Conklin, Andrew Berry's going to have to perform some wizardry there, because I don't know how he's going to do that, because I don't know who's trading for Conklin, for one, given the injury history that he's on. You might be able to post June 1st cut him. I don't have all the numbers on what that would look like, but I mean, you would owe him money in 2024, 2025, 2026, and a little in 2027 and 2028. So do they want that? I don't know. Do you try and just run it back and hope he can get healthy? But then in that case, what do you do with DeJuan Jones, who was playing very well before he got hurt? It's a lot of questions. Conklin's a big one, because I don't know how you address that one moving forward. But hey, that's why Andrew Berry gets paid all this money, and you and I just get to talk about it.
Yeah, relative to receiver help, you mentioned really good draft class. Is there any, maybe start with what type of receiver do you think helps Deshaun Watson the most?
I think he needs a guy that is more of a burner. We didn't get to see a lot with him and Marquise Goodwin this year, and it's unfortunate. We didn't see much of Marquise Goodwin in general. I mean, let's just start there. I think that's the type of guy he wants. Look at his success in Houston. He had Will Fuller. When Will Fuller was healthy with Deshaun Watson, that duo was very fun to watch. But then also, he's got Amari Cooper as this bigger body type guy, but you need that consistent deep threat. So I want to see who they end up going after in that regard in free agency. McCole Hardman is going to be a free agent. Marquise Hollywood Brown is going to be a free agent. You might be able to get a little bit on the cheaper. I know fans would love Mike Evans, because I'm in that boat. I would love a guy like Mike Evans. I don't know if he can get away from Tampa Bay, given the success he and Baker Mayfield had this past year. But that's the type of guy I would look for, a guy that can be that consistent vertical threat down the field. And the guy that really would be a really great fit, depends what happens with him in the Chargers. He's had a lot of injury history, but has a history with Watson as well, is Mike Williams from the Chargers. I don't know what happens there with his contract, if they try and trade him, because, again, they need to try and save some cap as well. So if he became available, that could be very interesting. You might be able to perform a similar deal that Andrew Berry did with Amari Cooper, give up about a 5th-round pick. You'd have to take on some of that money that he's owed, but again, he has that chemistry with Deshaun Watson going back to their days at Clemson.
Tyler Johnson, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tyler.
Thank you so much, Dave. Appreciate it.
Tyler Johnson, make sure you check him out. Faithful Dogs Podcast and Network 216. As always, really good Brown stuff. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.